Now, getting back to Chicago. Our first big show they ever had here in the amphitheater, when I was with the Assassins, I managed them in the main event. It was a sellout. I went from there to Markoff and Poffel, took them to main events, and we won. Then I was with Black Jack Lanza, probably one of the most successful wrestlers I've ever had. I headlined Sox Park. I headlined Soldiers Field. I've headlined almost every amphitheater show they've had. I've headlined Hammond. I was the main event. I was the one that packed them in with my voice.
Raymond Lewis Heenan was born in Chicago on November 1st, 1944. His father, Robert Heenan, who was a railroad worker, left his mom when he was less than a year old, so he was raised by his mother and grandmother. He was known at a young age for his wittiness and sense of humor, but according to Heenan, his mother, whom he had always called Millie, was the funniest person he ever met in his life, and looked like a combination of Lucille Ball and Betty Davis. In their neighborhood, there was a professional wrestler named Zach Melkoff who lived down the street. Zach served as a Chicago Park District officer during the day and had a unique routine of working out at the beach with rocks, lifting big ones to stay in shape. To Bobby, a 10-year-old kid at the time, Zach seemed like a huge and formidable figure. With cauliflower ears and a dark tan from frequenting the beach, Zach had a rough and tough appearance. One day, Zach approached Bobby's mother and asked if he could take a group of the neighborhood kids to a Marigold wrestling event. Seated in the front row of the bleachers, Bobby was instantly captivated by the spectacle. He recalled seeing a wrestler named Johnny Case, who later became a good friend and a travel companion to Japan. Johnny was also an educator and a president in the Illinois school system, and played the role of a heel. The most captivating aspect for Bobby that night was witnessing how Johnny Case would control the crowd. When he asked for silence, the audience made noise, and when he instructed them to speak, they fell silent. Bobby was amazed at how a man could command a crowd and evoke excitement, especially when soaring through the air. Right there, he became hooked. Wrestling became something he felt compelled to pursue, despite having previously harbored dreams of becoming a baseball player and being a huge Cubs fan, only living a few miles from Wrigley Field. After Marigold Television went off the air, there wasn't much wrestling that Bobby could recall. At the time, he lived in an apartment hotel which his mother managed. Him and his buddies would enter the lobby and engage in tag team matches, taking bumps on the furniture, creating their own show based on what they had witnessed on television. In 1959, Vince McMahon Sr. commenced running his TV show in Chicago, collaborating with Fred Collar, the local promoter. The show originated from Bridgeport, Connecticut, airing for 2 hours from midnight on Saturday until 2 a.m. the following morning. In awe, Bobby witnessed the likes of Johnny Valentine, Buddy Rogers, Bearcat Wright, the Kangaroos, and the Graham brothers. It differed from the wrestling he had watched in 1954 at the Marigold. Though still on television and not live, it provided an up-close view of these wrestlers. The fascination persisted. This is what Bobby had inspired to do, yet he remained unsure of how to achieve it. Upon turning 15, the hotel managed by his mother was sold. Moving in with his aunt, who was battling cancer, him and his mother moved to Indianapolis until she underwent surgery and his mother could secure employment. Having been held back twice, Bobby found himself in the 8th grade for the 3rd year, attributing it to poor attendance. He preferred taking the bus downtown, sleeping in the tents in the sports department at the local Marshall Fields, rather than attending school. School held little appeal, as he couldn't fathom the necessity of learning about events like the Boston Tea Party or historical figures like Magellan. He simply wanted to watch wrestling. A year after relocating to Indianapolis, his aunt passed away, but Bobby and his mother chose to remain there. One of Bobby's closest friends was Tom Mathis, a disc jockey affiliated with WIFE radio in Indianapolis. It was through him that Bobby organized his inaugural wrestling event. This event took place on a Saturday night at St. Rita's Boxing Gym in Indianapolis, with Bobby donning a mask and adopting the persona of the Avenger. At that point, he was not part of the wrestling industry and remained uninformed about the inner workings of the ring. The scheduled match was against Tom, recognized as one of the WIFE good guys. Entering the ring, Bobby delivered a promotional speech, accompanied by Scott Goodwin, an old friend, acting as their manager. The entourage included a couple of girls, a spectacle reminiscent of Gorgeous George's. Attired in a mask, snug wrestling pants, and boots fashioned from old hockey skates minus the blades, he also wore a jacket that resembled a stolen shower curtain from a local hotel. Practice sessions occurred in a spacious ring provided by Champ Chaney, an Indianapolis policeman involved in youth boxing. All proceeds from the concessions were donated to the local boxing program. The venue, though small, accommodated a crowded audience of 50 people, creating an enjoyable atmosphere. The crowd favored Tom, expressing their disdain for Bobby and his entourage. The match consisted of 2 out of 3 falls, with Bobby putting Tom over. He retained the mask, as the following week he needed to set up equipment and preferred to keep his identity as the Avenger concealed. Facing financial constraints, Bobby dropped out of school, never completing the 8th grade. He embarked on a series of jobs to support both himself and his mother, including roles as an usher at a theater, a clerk at a hardware and department store, a milkman, and a car jockey at a Ford dealership. It was during this period he received the call for wrestling. While at the dealership, Bobby held a second job at the Indianapolis Coliseum, serving as a stagehand responsible for setting up shows. BULLSH, the wrestling promoter at the Coliseum, arranged cards featuring notable names such as Cowboy Bob Ellis, Dick the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, the Shire Brothers, and Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens became a significant influence and close friend during the time. They not only wrestled each other, but also had opportunities for Bobby to manage him. Ray's ability to take a bump and his dynamic in-ring style with flowing blonde hair made him an exciting figure. Bobby also formed a connection with the original Sheik from Detroit. Despite the Sheik's intimidating appearance and fire-throwing antics, he looked out for Bobby. After a few months, Bobby acquainted himself with Russ Leonard, the publisher of Big Time Wrestling magazine. On Tuesday nights, he hitchhiked to the Armory, where he sold programs from 6 to 7. Subsequently, he assisted wrestlers with their bags, earning a bit of money. Following this, he sold Cokes until 8:30, when the matches began. Bobby stashed his Coke tray behind a door, adorned a sweater reading Championship Wrestling, and walked wrestlers to the ring as a second, earning $5 for each appearance. During the matches, he would return, shed the sweater, and resume selling Cokes. Post-match, he escorted one wrestler back and brought out the next, forming their routine. At one point, he even washed the Sheik's car for an additional $5. With a $52 monthly mortgage at the age of 16, Bobby felt a sense of financial freedom. As time progressed, Bobby found himself increasingly involved in the wrestling business. He took on various roles such as setting up the ring at the Coliseum, carrying jackets, and serving as a second around the ring. By the age of 17, he started working spot shows around Indianapolis, eagerly immersing himself into the wrestling world. On January 10, 1965, while working at the Ford dealership, he received a call from Dick the Bruiser instructing him to be at the local television station Channel 4 on Tuesday afternoon for interviews. Though uncertain about the purpose, he was thrilled until the Bruiser referred to him as Bobby, a name borrowed from Buddy Rogers' manager Bobby Davis. Despite the mix-up, he followed the Bruiser's instructions. After that, he was no longer known as Ray and would now be known as Bobby Heenan. Upon arrival, he found Bruiser and the tag team known as the Assassins, comprised of Joe Tommaso and Guy Mitchell, who wore masks. The Bruiser decided to appoint Bobby as the manager for the Assassins. Bruiser instructed them to be at the Holiday Inn on Highway 31 at 6 p.m. for a trip to Louisville. With no limos or first-class service, they embarked on a journey with the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, Guy, and himself in the car. During the ride, Bruiser and Wilbur engaged in a conversation using Carney language, a code unfamiliar to Bobby at the time. Pondering his purpose for the trip, he counted cows, uncertain about his role as a manager. Upon arrival in Louisville, Bruiser and Wilbur decided to initiate Bobby into the wrestling business. Bruiser handed him a mask, instructing him to put it on and emphasizing the staged nature of the matches. Bobby was warned against revealing the secrets and informed that any breach would result in severe consequences.
Let me tell you something. This is professional wrestling. This isn't boxing. This isn't karate. This isn't judo, a street fight, or anything else, or a back alley brawl. This is professional wrestling, where you use wrestling holds. If you're that stupid and can't get it through your head what a wrestling hold is, maybe I could take a little time out and show you. Now, let me be this simple and make it real easy for you to understand, dummy. Let everybody else understand.
In the dressing room, Bobby, now masked, introduced himself to other wrestlers, transitioning from his previous role of carrying jackets. He participated in a match against Moose Cholak and Wilbur Snyder. Moose, a sizable and clumsy opponent, was known for his dangerous presence in the ring. Bobby was given the finishing sequence, a jump onto the apron during the match, and Moose would bring him into the ring to unmask him. Entertaining thoughts of significant earnings, he imagined making $10,000 that night. However, the plan went awry as Moose struggled to remove the tightly knotted mask, eventually unmasking Bobby. Bobby leaped out of the ring and encountered a woman from Louisville with a distinctive rural demeanor. In an unexpected turn, the woman, lacking teeth, extinguished her cigar on Bobby's neck. Law enforcement intervened, detaining the woman, while Bobby hastily retreated to the dressing room. Post-incident, Bobby emerged from hiding and swiftly dressed before departing in a car. Arriving in Indianapolis at 2 a.m., he received a meager $5 from the bruiser, reflecting on the tumultuous night. Despite the challenging experiences, Bobby's passion for wrestling intensified. A few weeks later, his dual roles as a car dealership employee and a burgeoning wrestling figure clashed when the dealership boss discovered his wrestling pursuits. The conflict escalated, resulting in him losing his regular job. Undeterred, he expressed his commitment to full-time wrestling to the bruiser, despite the revelation that wrestling income wasn't significantly higher. Embracing the persona of Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan, inspired by Larry Hennig, Bobby seamlessly transitioned into wrestling. His lack of formal training didn't hinder his ability to perform and take bumps. Nights were spent setting up the ring and engaging in tag matches after the shows, contributing to their unconventional learning process. Bobby's unconventional training continued with friends, including Jim Kuntz and Tom Jones. They delved into managing, adopting a distinctive style by reacting passionately to their wrestlers' predicaments. Recognizing his physical limitations as a wrestler, he focused on leveraging his managerial skills, realizing that promoters preferred a dual role for cost efficiency. Reflecting on his initial wrestling match against Calvin Prince Pullins, Bobby candidly shared his struggles with endurance. Despite the challenges, the experience in his hometown was cherished. His career evolved through managing various tag teams and wrestlers, encountering unique opponents like a bear named Teddy. Bobby was also known as the first manager for the National Wrestling Alliance in St. Louis, offering a glimpse into the refined, sophisticated environment that contrasted sharply with the chaotic and boisterous wrestling scenes they were accustomed to. After leaving the WWA, at the suggestion of Wally Carbo, Bobby entered the American Wrestling Association in Minnesota in 1969. He encountered Larry Hennig, known as Pretty Boy, who was already teaming up with Harley Race. Initially adopting the moniker Gorgeous Bobby Heenan, Bobby grew dissatisfied with the common use of gorgeous in wrestling personas. He assumed the role of manager for the tag team comprising Nick Bockwinkel and Ray the Crippler Stevens, guiding them to capture a third AWA World Tag Team Championship. As Bockwinkel and Stevens engaged in a feud with the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser, the latter famously dubbed Heenan as the Weasel. This nickname stuck, and Heenan was henceforth referred to as Weasel by his adversaries throughout his wrestling career. The AWA marked the inception of the initial infamous heel stable, the Heenan family, featuring Bockwinkel, Bobby Duncombe Jr., and Blackjack Lanza. After 2 years in the AWA, Bobby returned to Indiana in 1971. However, he left Indianapolis for good in 1974 due to a financial dispute. Recounting an incident at Market Square Arena, where a show headlined by Dick the Bruiser and Sheik drew a crowd of 18,000, Bobby felt shortchanged with a $600 payoff compared to the Sheik's $2,000. This led to his decision to return to the AWA. In 1973, Bobby found himself in Japan with the Destroyer, who refused to remove his mask, a practice he maintained even in his retirement. Bobby spent considerable time with him in Japan, where the Destroyer, fluent in Japanese, became a beloved figure. On January 25, 1975, an irate fan discharged a firearm at Heenan in Chicago's International Amphitheater following his interference in one of Bockwinkel's matches. Fortunately, Bobby emerged unscathed, but the incident resulted in injuries to 5 individuals seated ringside, with one person in critical condition. Later in the same year, Bockwinkel secured his initial AWA World Heavyweight Championship, putting an end to the 7-year reign of Vern Gagne, the perennial champion and the AWA promoter. During Bockwinkel's tenure as the AWA champion in 1976, Lanza and Duncombe achieved victory by capturing the AWA World Tag Team Championship. This made Heenan the first manager in history to concurrently oversee both the singles and tag team champions of a major wrestling promotion. Despite Wally Carbo's occasional dishonesty regarding payments, Bobby acknowledged his generosity in helping others. He recounted instances where Wally assisted individuals in financial distress, even if it led to unexpected consequences. One such incident involved Wally being arrested for possessing stolen merchandise after helping a man who offered him a television for $100. Surprisingly, the fans embraced Wally, chanting his name louder than ever at the St. Paul Civic Center. Recalling a journey from Manitoba back to Minneapolis with Wally, Bobby and Ray Stevens found themselves lost. In a humorous twist, Bobby explained to a police officer that they were hitchhiking while waiting for Wally, who had gone into a hotel for directions. After the encounter with the cop, Bobby the Brain Heenan found himself in a tense situation with Wally. Emerging from a hotel, Wally, visibly angered, informed Bobby that he had been fined $200 for an open bottle in the car and picking up hitchhikers. Bobby also recounted the wrestling career of George Gadaski, a referee and a wrestler known for his toughness and dedication to setting up the ring before every show. George's commitment to his task didn't spare him from Vern and Wally's complaints about the budget for maintaining the ring. After George's unfortunate death from a brain tumor, a revelation at his funeral shocked Vern and Wally. George had built a barn using wood Vern had repeatedly bought for the ring, a fact that became apparent only after George's passing. Recalling Wally Carbo's gestures of hospitality, Bobby shared a humorous memory of Wally providing him a room at the Dykeman Hotel with a less than impressive view of the wall. Even years after Wally's passing, Bobby still humorously thanked him for the memorable accommodation. Returning to the AWA in 1974, Bobby managed Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens. While Ray Stevens, Bobby's idol, was known for his talent and carefree lifestyle, Nick Bockwinkel exemplified professionalism, maintaining a conscientious approach to his career. The stark contrast in their approach to wrestling provided an interesting dynamic within the business. As Bobby and Nick Bockwinkel flew from Houston to Minneapolis after working for Texas promoter Paul Bosch, Bobby encountered a strange incident on the plane. Seated in the last row, he noticed a man attempting to open the emergency door. Reacting swiftly, Bobby restrained the man and sought assistance. However, Nick, unfazed, questioned Bobby's actions, playfully addressing him as Sir Robert, due to his knighting by Lord James Blears on the floor of the St. Paul Civic Center. Later, Bobby learned that the man was recently released from a mental institution and was merely searching for the bathroom. Upon landing in Memphis, the pilot expressed gratitude, and Bobby humorously requested a free round-trip ticket, receiving 2 bottles of vodka instead. Nick Bockwinkel, known for his extensive vocabulary, often used complex words that puzzled Bobby and Ray Stevens. Their playful banter included a misunderstanding about the term paradox. Baron von Raschke teased Nick about being educated beyond his means, highlighting his intellectual prowess. Engaging in some light-hearted ribbing, Bobby joked about Nick's AWA championship belt, which was crafted by Denver prison inmates. Teasing Nick about the size of the belt, Bobby suggested it resembled a license plate. The AWA, with its Wintertown schedule and talent roster, stood out as a major league for Bobby Heenan, a step up from Indianapolis. However, despite the favorable conditions, Bobby decided to leave for Atlanta in 1979 with Black Jack Lanza. Vern struggled to explain Bobby's departure. They concocted a story where Bobby was suspended for a year, citing an altercation with AWA President Stanley Blackburn. Atlanta, a territory governed by the National Wrestling Alliance, presented a different landscape. NWA champions faced strict regulations, with the board determining title changes, deposits required, and even specific match outcomes. In Atlanta, Bobby managed a version of the Bobby Heenan family, including Killer Carl Cox, Masked Superstar, and the unconventional Dr. Judo, Bill Howard. The wrestling world in Atlanta had its quirks, exemplified by Killer Carl Cox's unconventional match against Dick Burdock. Before the bout, Carl playfully inserted a softened Hershey chocolate bar down his trunks. When Murdoch executed a move, Carl, in a comical manner, pulled out a big brown hand from his trunks, leaving the audience with laughter and confusion. In another incident in Rome, Georgia, during a tag match with Heenan, Cox disappeared mid-match, leaving Bobby to fend for himself. When Cox returned, he had 3 feet of toilet paper hanging from his trunks, distracting the audience as he indulged in a hot dog at the concession stand. This unorthodox behavior continued as Cox, dubbed the Macon champion, repeatedly discarded his championship belt, expressing his disinterest in holding the title. Cox's strange sense of humor extended to his use of a glass eye. In restaurants, he would drop the glass eye into his soup and beckon the waitress with one eye shut, creating a surprising and amusing spectacle. Additionally, Cox enjoyed teasing young Japanese wrestlers in the locker room, pretending to lose his glass eye among his belongings, only to reveal it between his cheeks as a playful prank. Bobby Heenan found himself in a nerve-wracking situation while suspended in a cage above the ring during Cox's match against Bob Armstrong in Atlanta. Uncomfortable with heights, Bobby faced the additional challenge of throwing powder to Cox while clad in black attire. Despite the tense moments, the unique and unpredictable nature of wrestling in Atlanta kept the audience engaged. Bobby also shared his experience working with renowned announcer Gordon Solie in Atlanta. Solie, known for his deep knowledge of wrestling and memorable catchphrases, commanded respect within the industry. A memorable incident involving Solie getting involved in a storyline led to his temporary dismissal, showcasing the fine line between storytelling and protecting the integrity of the announcers. Heenan reflected on his time in Atlanta. He expressed the challenges of working with Booker Ole Anderson and the less than friendly environment. Despite the lack of financial rewards, Bobby stayed for nearly a year before deciding to return to the AWA, marking the end of his Atlanta wrestling chapter. In 1979, Bobby married Cynthia Jean Perrette, whom he stayed married to until his death. In the latter part of 1979, Bobby made a comeback to the AWA and resumed his managerial role with Nick Bockwinkel, leading to a resurgence in championship success, notably against Hulk Hogan in 1983. While on AWA's Japan tour in '83, Bobby suffered a neck injury in a match with Onita, which subsequently limited his in-ring capabilities. In 1984, he departed from the AWA to join the World Wrestling Federation. Unlike many AWA talents who left abruptly, Bobby honored the AWA's requirement of a 6-week notice for booking and syndication purposes. Despite claims by most talents that WWF promoter Vince McMahon incentivized them to disregard their notices, Bobby maintained his commitment to the Gagne family, working out his notice in good faith.
Short and sweet. Stanley Blackburn, the president of the AWA, agreed with me for the past interference with Heenan's conduct, interfering in the matches. In the past 10 years, Heenan is through with the AWA. He is definitely suspended. He will not wrestle for the AWA or manage.
His departure from AWA was acknowledged on the September 28th broadcast of AWA All-Star Wrestling, where Wally Carbo announced that Bobby had been suspended indefinitely by the AWA president Stanley Blackburn for inciting an attack on the Fabulous Ones by Heenan family members Nick Bockwinkel and Mr. Saito. In 1984, the WWF enlisted Bobby with the initial plan for him to manage Jesse Ventura. Unfortunately, Ventura's retirement, prompted by blood clots in his lungs, thwarted this intended partnership. Consequently, he directed his managerial role to Big John Studd, his close associate from the AWA. Bobby guided John Studd through a feud against Andre the Giant, culminating in a high-stake confrontation at the inaugural WrestleMania. The match featured a unique stipulation, a $15,000 body slam challenge, with the condition that Andre would be forced to retire if he lost. Andre emerged victorious in the encounter, not only securing his wrestling future, but also theoretically tossing the bag containing the $15,000 into the crowd. However, Bobby swiftly seized the bag before it could be fully dispersed. Bobby orchestrated the reformation of the Heenan family, a formidable group in the WWF that included a roster spanning Big John Studd, Ken Patera, Paul Orndorff, King Kong Bundy, Andre the Giant, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, Ravishing Rick Rude, King Harley Race, The Islanders, Hercules, The Barbarian, Mr. Perfect, The Red Rooster, and the Brooklyn Brawler. Engaging in a heated feud with Hulk Hogan during the 1980s, Bobby took charge of WrestleMania challengers to Hogan's title, managing King Kong Bundy in a headline bout at WrestleMania 2 in 1986. Leading up to WrestleMania 3, Bobby aligned with Andre the Giant, who challenged Hogan at the event. Although neither secured the title then, Andre defeated Hogan for the championship on the main event on February 5, 1988, after aligning himself with the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. He occasionally stepped into the wrestling ring during his tenure in the WWF, making his in-ring debut at Madison Square Garden in November 1984. He achieved a clean victory by pinning Salvatore Bellomo. In 1984, WWF owner Vince McMahon capitalized on his microphone and comedic skills, leading to Bobby taking on the role of a color commentator, alongside his managerial duties. He stepped into the shoes of Jesse Ventura on Primetime Wrestling and All-American Wrestling, both airing on the USA networks, forming a dynamic duo with Gorilla Monsoon. He also filled in for Ventura on All-Star Wrestling, a syndicated program that was later replaced by Wrestling Challenge in the fall of 1986. While these shows were originally designed to recap weekly WWF events, viewers were drawn in by the entertaining interactions between Bobby and Gorilla Monsoon. Identifying himself as a broadcast journalist, Bobby took a unique approach by criticizing fan favorites and actively supporting their opponents when they resorted to cheating or underhanded tactics. Bobby humorously referred to the fans as humanoids and often labeled fan favorites, especially those in the enhancement talent category, as ham and eggers. Their on-screen banter frequently saw Heenan launching into extended rants in favor of villainous wrestlers, prompting an exasperated Monsoon to interject with classic lines as, "Will you stop? Give me a break?" or a sarcastic "Please." In 1993, still grappling with the repercussions of a broken neck he had sustained a decade earlier, and finding it challenging to cope with the demanding work hours, Bobby made the decision to part ways with the WWF at the year's end. On the December 6, 1993 edition of Monday Night Raw, broadcast from Westchester County Center in White Plains, New York, Gorilla Monsoon bid Heenan a farewell on air. Frustrated by Heenan's persistent insults, Gorilla Monsoon dramatically ejected him and his belongings from the arena onto the street. Following the show, Heenan revealed that him and Gorilla Monsoon shared an emotional embrace, shedding tears for over an hour at the hotel where they both stayed. Initially intending to retire and spend quality time with his family and relax, Bobby's plan took a turn when WCW reached out to him soon after his departure from the WWF. Initially uncertain, he accepted WCW's offer upon learning of their lighter work schedules and health insurance benefits. He also highlighted the advantageous proximity of WCW's base in Atlanta to his daughter's school in Alabama as a contributing factor to his decision. On January 27, 1994, Bobby ventured into World Championship Wrestling, marking his debut with the promotion. Initially brought in to succeed Jesse Ventura, his former client, Bobby assumed the role of color commentator for WCW Saturday Night. Over time, he not only took over Ventura's position as lead commentator for pay-per-view events, but also assumed commentary duties for the syndicated WCW Worldwide and Clash of Champions events produced for TBS. With the premiere of WCW Monday Nitro in September 1995, he transitioned from Saturday Night to work on the new show full-time. He joined former Chicago Bears defensive lineman Steve McMichael as an analyst alongside play-by-play man Eric Bischoff. Subsequently, he was frequently paired with Tony Schiavone, whom in real life he didn't care for. During the January 23, 1996 episode of Clash of Champions, in a match between Eddie Guerrero and Brian Pillman, Pillman left the ring and grabbed Bobby, who had a history of neck problems, by the collar, forcing him to say, "What the are you doing?" live on air. In June 1996, 5 months later, Bobby made a one-off return to ringside at the Great American Bash as the manager of two of his former clients, Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, in a tag team match against broadcast colleague Steve McMichael and then Carolina Panthers linebacker Kevin Green. He also played a crucial role in convincing McMichael to betray his partner, allowing Flair and Anderson to secure the victory. This also filled the vacant spot in the Four Horsemen that Brian Pillman had left when he departed from the company earlier that year. Starting in late January 2000, WCW replaced Heenan on Monday Nitro and pay-per-view events with Mark Madden. Bobby remained on Thunder alongside Mike Tenay and later Tony Schiavone until Stevie Ray took over in July of 2000. Bobby was then exclusively seen with Scott Hudson on Worldwide until his release by WCW in November 2000. He attributed his uninspired state in WCW to the negative work environment and conflicts with Tony Schiavone. Later that year, after his departure, WCW went out of business. On April 1st, 2002, Bobby made a triumphant return to the WWF, providing commentary for the Gimmick Battle Royal match at WrestleMania alongside Mean Gene Okerlund. In January 2002, he revealed he was battling throat cancer. By 2004, the cancer had entered remission, though the treatments led to significant weight loss, resulting in a noticeable transformation in his appearance and voice. Bobby Heenan's initial memoir, titled Bobby the Brain Heenan, Wrestling's Bad Boy Tells All, hit the shelves courtesy of Triumph Books on September 1st, 2002, featuring a foreword from Hulk Hogan. Following that, a second memoir, Chair Shots and Other Obstacles, Winning Life's Wrestling Matches, was published by Sports Publishing on February 1st, 2004, and boasted an introduction by Ric Flair. Steve Anderson co-authored both books. Recognizing his contributions, Bobby was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the class of 2004 by Black Jack Lanza. The subsequent night, he participated in a skit at WrestleMania 20 with Gene Okerlund, Mae Young, and the Fabulous Moolah. Demonstrating his continued involvement, he had the honor of introducing his protege Paul Orndorff, the Blackjacks, and Nick Bockwinkel into the WWE Hall of Fame in the classes of 2005, 2006, and 2007 respectively. His final appearance with WWE, he served as one of the speakers during Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night on the June 11, 2007 episode of Raw. In December 2007, Bobby underwent reconstructive surgery on his jaw following an unsuccessful initial procedure. Placed in a medically induced coma, by the latter half of January 2008, he emerged from the medically induced coma, though he faced a period during which he couldn't speak and had to communicate using his eyes. In December 2009, he was hospitalized after an examination of his reconstructed jaw revealed an infection requiring treatment. Over the last few years of his life, Bobby experienced a series of falls, including breaking a hip and shoulder in a fall that also fractured his pelvis in 2010. In April 2014, he fell out of bed and broke a shoulder, and in May 2016, he fell once again, resulting in a broken hip. On September 17, 2017, surrounded by his family at his residence in Largo, Florida, Bobby passed away at the age of 72. The cause of his death was organ failure stemming from complications related to throat cancer. Bobby is widely regarded as the greatest wrestling manager of all time, with WWE recognizing him at the pinnacle of their 25 greatest managers list in 2007. Mike Mooneyham, a columnist for the Post-Courier, describes Bobby as a blueprint for managers, and fellow manager Jim Cornette acknowledges that Heenan shaped his perception of what a manager should be. He earned a substantial six-figure payoff for promoting the Andre the Giant vs. Hulk Hogan match at WrestleMania 3, often hailed as one of the most famous American professional wrestling matches, solidifying his place in managerial history. Jim Ross declares Heenan the greatest talent in the history of the wrestling business. Ross particularly praised Bobby as a color commentator, highlighting his exceptional abilities in the role. That was the story of Bobby the Brain Heenan. Harley Race was a pro wrestler, promoter, and trainer. Born in Maryville, Missouri in 1943, after a rough childhood and a stint in jail, he began his career in 1959 doing odd jobs for Missouri promoter Gus Karras, driving around the 800-pound Happy Humphrey, as well as attending to his daily needs and on occasion facing him in the ring. Harley made his debut under the moniker Jack Long, the kayfabe brother of John Long. after a near-fatal car crash which took the life of his pregnant wife and almost losing his leg after grueling physical therapy for several months. Harley returned to the ring the following year. He would go on to become NWA World Heavyweight Champion 9 times and also capturing dozens of other titles in various promotions, including being crowned the very first King of the Ring. As well as the National Wrestling Alliance, he would go on to make appearances in the AWA, WWF, WCW, and even own part of the Central States Territory. Referred to as the greatest wrestler on God's green earth, in the early 1990s, he took a step back from the business after another serious car crash. In 1999, he participated in the NBC special Exposed Pro Wrestling Secrets. His face was covered to conceal his identity as he broke kayfabe and discussed the inner workings of the business. That same year, he started World League Wrestling, which he would continue to run until his death in 2019. One of the toughest men to ever step into the ring and would protect the life of the business even if it meant risking his own. This is the story of Harley Race.
Hell, I come 40,000 miles over here to see what them pretty little lips gonna do to me, baby.
Harley Leland Race was born to sharecroppers J. Allen Race and Mary Race on April 11, 1943 in Maryville, Missouri, weighing 8 pounds and 6 ounces, but grew up in the nearby town of Quitman. His father also worked as a bus driver to feed his brother and 4 sisters. At 2 years old, he suffered a serious eye injury, which he fell on a wire and cut open one of his eyeballs. He was an early fan of professional wrestling, watching programming from the nearby Chicago territory on the Dumont television network. He was in awe after watching his first match and told his family that's what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. By the 10th grade, he was the biggest kid in class, as well as class president. He would enjoy practicing headlocks and other wrestling moves with lifelong friend Danny Keever, as well as fishing trips and tipping over outhouses. While in high school, an altercation with a classmate led the principal kneeing Harley in the back of the head as he tried to break up the fight. Enraged, Harley attacked him, resulting in his expulsion. Harley would go on to work on several farms, including one owned by Stanislaus Sabisco, who, even though he was an old man at the time, would still show Harley a few holds. At the age of 16 in 1959, Harley was arrested along with another youth to face check charges, reportedly trying to cash a $15 and an $18 check. In September of 1960, Harley was again arrested and charges of criminal assault were filed. Harley was charged with the rape of a 17-year-old College Springs girl. He was held in Page County Jail with his bail set at $5,000. He would be found not guilty and acquitted in April of 1961 after the jury deliberated for an hour and 10 minutes. In July of that same year, Harley was involved in one of many car accidents when he reportedly fell asleep behind the wheel and crashed into a tree. He was taken to the hospital and released with minor injuries. In fall of that year, Harley began working for Gus Karras in the Kansas Territory, running errands as well as driving around the super heavyweight Happy Humphrey, who also taught him ring psychology. Because of Humphrey's size, he could not fit in the showers and motel rooms, so he would lay on the ground and Harley would have the task of hosing him off and scrubbing him with a mop. Harley would be paid $5 a day to drive him around plus room and board, and also wrestled him on several occasions in which he would be paid $25 per match. Eventually, Harley started wrestling on some of his shows, and some of the veteran wrestlers helped further Harley's training. Harley would also wrestle in carnivals, being challenged by locals, where he would earn a tough guy reputation. His first official match was in Waterloo, Iowa, against Bill Cole. Because there were several gangs in the area, Harley wanted to set himself apart, and to send this message loud and clear, he strung 7 needles together, dipped them in Indian ink, and tattooed Lone Star on his forearm with a star underneath it. One day one of the local gangs did try and hassle him, but that was the same day he happened to have his father's shotgun in the back seat and wasn't afraid to use it. He pulled it out and sprayed their car, and they never bothered him again.
But every single time that I come around, it seems you got another man trying to keep you down.
He married his sweetheart, Vivian Jones, in November. Unfortunately, they were involved in a severe car accident on Christmas Day, 1 month after the wedding. While driving in 17 inches of snow at approximately 12:35 a.m., their vehicle collided head-on with a tractor-trailer full of eggs who was trying to avoid a snowdrift, sending their car flying 80 feet. Jones, who was pregnant at the time, died at the crash. Initially, Harley was also pronounced dead at the scene, but in the ambulance, the paramedics realized he still had a pulse. Harley nearly had his leg amputated as a result and was told he'd likely never walk again. Karras heard about his employee's condition, went rushing into the hospital, and blocked the planned amputation, declaring it over my dead body. In doing so, he saved Harley's leg. Although he recovered, doctors told him that he might never walk again and his wrestling career was definitely over. Undaunted, Harley endured grueling physical therapy for several months and made a full recovery. For a short time, Harley studied the Bible and had hopes of becoming a minister, but the wrestling bug wouldn't leave him alone.
Well, you might think you're driving me insane, but I made the game that you're trying to play. You know, I think you maybe.
At age 18, he moved to Nashville and began wrestling under the ring name Jack Long, forming a tag team with storyline brother John Long. The duo quickly captured the Southern Tag Team Championship. In 1963, Harley forged his driver's license and changed the year from 1943 to 1942 so he could drink legally a year earlier. In later life, it would take him almost a year to clear it up and he almost faced criminal charges. It was that same year he met Billy Strong, who also wrestled as John Long. Since him and Harley looked a lot alike and he was looking for a tag team partner, Harley would become his kayfabe brother Jack Long and would win his first belt, co-holder of the Southern Tag Team Championship. After a few months, he would win his first singles title, the Southwestern Heavyweight Championship. Around this time, Harley began challenging fans and inviting them into the ring. When they were stupid enough to do it, he figured it gave him legal right to teach them a lesson. He would instruct the security staff to let them into the ring and put them in a submission that would leave them squealing in front of the audience. If they were tough-looking guys bigger than him, he would hit them with a surprise headbutt, sometimes breaking their nose. Not a lot of fans would jump into the ring with Harley, but none would ever beat him.
Maybe you ought to know this ain't my first rodeo.
Through his time wrestling in the old Memphis Auditorium, he would often return backstage and find one of his biggest fans waiting for him, none other than Elvis Presley. According to many sources, Elvis loved wrestling and often used wrestlers as his bodyguards.
I've been around long enough to know some things you can't take back.
Around this time, Harley married his second wife, Sandra Jones, who regularly traveled with him. One night during a match in Glasgow, Kentucky, Harley decided to show off a move he had recently learned, a backflip from the top rope, which he would land on his feet. He landed right where another wrestler had spit in the ring. His right leg slipped on the spit and twisted sideways and snapped his ankle. He finished the match, then drove 100 miles back to Nashville before seeking medical attention. After his leg healed, he wrestled in Missouri for a while before heading to Amarillo, Texas, where he would work under Dory Funk Sr. for 5 months. This would also be the start of his serious back problems, which would haunt him till the day he died. When he returned to Kansas, the wrestling business was starting to cool down, as there were more wrestlers than events to employ them. To supplement his income, he bought a hay truck and would haul hay from farmers' fields to their barn, charging 10 cents per bale. On a good day, he would often bale 1,000, and after paying 2 kids he had helping him, he would walk away with $70. On nights when he was booked to wrestle, his older brother would drive the truck. In the mid-60s, like most men his age, Harley received a draft notice to go fight in Vietnam. During his physical, the doctors took one look at his leg and sent him home.
I got Sammy on the phone, Nikki at home, trying to get along so I can be with you, babe.
After parting ways with John Long and briefly using the name the Great Mortimer, under the suggestion of his father, he would begin wrestling under his given name, Harley Race. After wrestling Vern Gagne one night in Omaha, Nebraska, Vern told him he had the perfect tag team partner for him, a former All-American football player named Larry Hennig. Harley had briefly met Hennig while in Amarillo and jumped at the chance of becoming his partner. They would be billed as Handsome Harley Race and Pretty Boy Larry Hennig and would develop a close friendship that would last a lifetime. By 1965, they wasted no time gunning for the top tag team, Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. On January 30th, they beat the veterans for the titles. Harley at 22 and Larry at 29 became the youngest AWA tag team champions at the time. The veterans wouldn't let it go and began showing up for matches dressed in blonde wigs and calling themselves the Dolly Sisters, attempting to mock the young team. Behind the scenes, Harley and Larry were honored. In 1967, they would even go as far as to show their disdain for the young team in an issue of the Wrestling Review magazine, calling them Gertrude Hennig and Sylvia Race. The angle between the two teams was still hot and continued to bring fans in. 2 weeks after winning the titles, Harley was involved in an altercation at the Chestnut Tree restaurant in Minneapolis, Minnesota. After Harley confronted a man who was harassing a woman in the restaurant, knocking him unconscious, the man's friend, John Morton, stabbed Harley in the back. Harley was hospitalized and Morton was arrested. In another attempt to gain publicity, Harley and Larry signed up for the inaugural International 500 snowmobile race from Winnipeg, Canada to St. Paul, Minnesota. Harley would drop out of the race early after his snowmobile broke down after 25 miles, but Larry went on to finish the race and even won the Survivor Trophy for overcoming various hardships along the way. Harley and Larry Hennig were designated to feud with the Bruiser and Crusher and other top tag teams for the next several years and were given 3 title reigns. Vern Gagne, in particular, was promoted as a hated rival of the team, partnering with several other wrestlers in matches against Race and Hennig during their AWA run. In October 1967, Gagne was credited with breaking one of Hennig's legs, thus giving him some much-needed time off from the ring. Harley, as the storyline went, was allowed to choose a new partner and retain the AWA World Tag Team Championship. Harley's choice was Chris Markoff, but the duo was defeated in their first title defense match against a team of Pat O'Connor and Wilbur Snyder in November of 1967. For the next several months, Harley teamed with Hard-Boiled Haggerty, who over the years presented Gagne with some of his greatest matches. Together, Race and Haggerty often were cast against Gagne and Cowboy Bill Watts. In March 1968, after Hennig's return to the ring, he and Harley were back together, though the two never won the AWA Tag Team Championship.
No, I ain't got time to change your mind, 'cause the bus is a-humming. Are you staying, are you coming back?
Despite his tag team success, Harley left the AWA after several years at the top of the division to pursue a singles career in the National Wrestling Alliance. Being a gun enthusiast, by the late 1960s, he owned literally hundreds of guns and would take at least one with him everywhere he went. By this time, Harley and his wife Sandra had split up after they had a daughter, Candice Marie, and he met another woman. One night while on a short road trip together, a Corvette screamed by his car. As Harley drove around the curve, the Corvette was upside down in a ditch. The engine was on fire and was spreading to the back of the car near the gas tank. Still haunted by his car crash in 1960, Harley slammed on the brakes, got out of his car, and told his girlfriend to go for help. He ran to the car and positioned his shoulder under the car door and somehow managed to use his leg strength to push the car up and over onto its wheels. The driver's head rolled out of the car and over towards Harley's feet. The last thing Harley wanted to see happen was to see his body burn up with the car, so he grabbed him and pulled him away, but it was too late. The man had lost his life. The local media covered the event, and Harley was looked at as a hero for risking his own life trying to save the man. The only problem with that is Harley worked for years trying to become a villain, but the event would cause fans to begin cheering him. Even flipping them off didn't work, they still cheered. Harley married his third wife, Yvonne. Together they had a son, Justin. In 1970, after a match, an irate fan grabbed the starting bell and attacked Harley, who would retaliate by striking the fan. Harley was taken to the hospital after being treated, but no charges were laid. In 1973, he took the nickname Mad Dog after a fan threw a piece of raw meat in the ring and Harley bit into it like a rabid animal. That same year, he faced NWA World Heavyweight Champion Dory Funk Jr. in Kansas City. Harley emerged from the battle as the new champion in what was perceived by fans as a stunning upset. Behind the scenes, Funk had pulled out of losing the title to Jack Briscoe, citing injuries in a truck accident. In truth, Amarillo promoter Dory Funk Sr. did not want his son losing the title to a fellow babyface. Harley, a known tough street fighter, was under orders from the NWA to not let Funk leave the ring as champion that night. The ending was a work, with Funk dropping the title in the third fall as planned and Bill Kirsten dropping the Mad Dog nickname during the match. A televised defense from his first reign, held in Calgary against Klondike Bill, aired as the main event on an episode of the promotion's Stampede Wrestling program, where Harley successfully defended his title. Though Harley held the title for only a few months, losing it to Briscoe in Houston, Texas, in July he became a worldwide superstar and a headliner everywhere he appeared. Harley was determined to eventually regain the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, often moving between territories and collecting several regional titles, including 8 Central States Heavyweight Championships, 7 Missouri Heavyweight Championships, the Georgia Heavyweight Championship, the Stampede North American Heavyweight Championship in Canada, the Japan-based NWA United National Heavyweight, and the PWF World Heavyweight Championships, and becoming the first holder of the Mid-Atlantic United States Heavyweight Championship, still defended today as the WWE United States Championship. This kept Harley in contention for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, and Harley vowed that he would only need one chance against a champion to regain it. Harley finally got his wish in 1977, facing familiar rival Terry Funk, who had become the champion since their previous encounters in Toronto. Harley won the title by submission with the Indian Deathlock, a rarely used submission move, but one that put great pressure on Funk's injured leg. The NWA World Heavyweight Champion once again, Harley at this time established his dominance, defending the title up to 6 times a week and holding it for almost 5 years, excluding extremely short reigns by Tommy Rich, Dusty Rhodes, and Giant Baba. Harley feuded with many of the legends of the NWA, including Dick the Bruiser, Pat Patterson, and Angelo Poffo. In 1978, he had a series of violent matches throughout the Midwest with the Sheik, culminating in a bloody 2x4 with a nail in it match in front of 12,000 fans at the Cobo Hall. The NWA and AWA and WWF were all on good terms, and Harley engaged in title versus title matches with WWF Heavyweight Champions Superstar Billy Graham and Bob Backlund, as well as AWA World Heavyweight Champion Nick Bockwinkel. Harley toured extensively all over the country and the world, including Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and many stints in Japan, where he was already well known for his visits with Larry Hennig. On October 13, 1978, Harley body slammed Andre the Giant. Harley would repeat the feat on January 7, 1979, though it was outside the ring during the match. Harley, after many victories over Dusty Rhodes and other great wrestlers, lost the title to Rhodes in 1981. Rhodes lost the title to up-and-coming star Ric Flair, though Harley was able to defeat Flair in St. Louis in 1983 for his 7th reign as champion, breaking the record previously held by Lou Thesz. What followed was one of the classic angles of the 1980s, which led to the first NWA Starrcade event. Determined not to lose the title again, Harley offered a $25,000 bounty to anyone who could eliminate Flair from the NWA. Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater attacked Flair, inflicting what appeared to be a career-ending neck injury, and collecting the bounty from Harley after Flair announced his retirement. Flair's retirement was a ruse, however, and he eventually returned to action, much to Harley's surprise. NWA officials set up a championship match to be titled Starrcade, a Flair for the Gold. The match was to be held in Flair's hometown of Greensboro, North Carolina, which enraged Harley. Harley lost the title to Flair in the bloody and memorable Starrcade Steel Cage match, with Gene Kiniski as a special referee. Flair jumped on top of Harley from the top rope and pinned him to become champion. Harley regained the NWA World Heavyweight Championship for a 2-day reign in New Zealand in 1984. After many years, it is now a recognized title change, but his loss to Flair at Starrcade was largely seen as a torch passing from Harley to Flair. Flair would go on to credit Harley for igniting his career. Later, Harley left the NWA because NWA President Sam Muchnick was losing his capabilities. Harley returned to the AWA in 1984 to wrestle Curt Hennig. The confrontation was fueled by Larry Hennig confronting his former tag team partner at the end of the match. Harley also wrestled former AWA World Heavyweight Champion Rick Martel as part of Wrestle Rock in 1986. Toward the end of his in-ring career, he returned to the AWA, most notably against Larry Zbyszko for an AWA World Heavyweight Championship match in August 1990, which was featured as the main event of an AWA broadcast of ESPN, making it the final AWA television taping. The match ended in a double countout. AWA folded after the match. Early in his career, Harley became involved in the ownership side of wrestling, buying a portion of the Kansas City and later St. Louis territories known as Heart of America sports attractions. St. Louis was a stronghold for the NWA, and around this time in 1984, WWF owner Vince McMahon began his invasion of NWA territories, including St. Louis, his ambition to build a truly national wrestling promotion. Harley was enraged, famously confronting Hulk Hogan and the Funk Brothers at a WWF event in Kansas City. Harley lost over $500,000 as an owner of the Kansas City territory, and despite his championship years being at an end and wishing to retire from active competition, was forced to rely on continuing to wrestle to make a living. He continued to travel the United States and abroad, and signed with McMahon's WWF in 1986.
Well, you might think you drive me insane. I made the game that you're trying to play, you know.
In May 1986, Harley entered the WWF, managed by longtime friend Bobby the Brain Heenan, bleaching his hair blonde and billing himself again as Handsome Harley Race. During a time when the WWF did not recognize the existence of other promotions and the accomplishments a wrestler made there, WWF officials came up with a solution to recognize his wrestling pedigree by having him win the King of the Ring tournament. After this, Harley had a coronation ceremony, coming to the ring in a royal crown and cape to the ceremonial accompaniment of the 10th movement known as the Great Gates of Kiev by Modest Mussorgsky. After winning the match, Harley would make his defeated opponent bow and kneel before him. Usually Heenan would assist the defeated opponent to bow and kneel by grabbing their hair and forcing them to bow before Harley. He participated in a notable feud with the Junkyard Dog, culminating in a match at WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome, in which Harley cleanly pinned JYD after a belly-to-belly suplex. JYD was required to bow to Harley as a winner, but after he bowed and Harley got up, JYD attacked him before leaving with the King's cape to a standing ovation. Harley would spend 1987 feuding with Hulk Hogan and Jim Duggan, who, during a televised confrontation, took Harley's crown and robe, though Harley later attacked Duggan and took them back. His feud with Duggan was highlighted by an extended brawl at the 1987 Slammy Awards. In early 1988, he suffered an injury in a match against Hogan, in which he tried to hit Hogan prone on a table at ringside with a swan dive headbutt. Hogan moved out of the way, and Harley impacted the table inwards. The metal edge forced its way up to Harley's abdomen, giving him a hernia. Following this incident, and during his recovery, the WWF ran an angle where they acknowledged his injury, and his manager Heenan vowed to crown a new king. Harley returned in late 1988, joining Heenan's team at Survivor Series. Harley left the WWF in early 1989, following a brief comeback from hernia surgery and an attempt to regain his crown from the new king, Haku, at the Royal Rumble. In 1990, he divorced his third wife, Yvonne Jones. After leaving the WWF, Harley continued to wrestle until the spring of 1991, most notably with World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, Stampede Wrestling in Calgary, the NWA, All Japan, and the AWA. He defeated Miguel Perez Jr. for the WWC Caribbean Heavyweight Championship on January 6, 1990 in Puerto Rico, making it his last title reign before dropping it to Jose Gonzalez on March 4th. After his appearance in the AWA, he briefly retired from wrestling. Harley made his return at the Great American Bash on July 7, 1990, when he defeated former NWA World Heavyweight Champion Tommy Rich. He began making appearances on house shows and immediately would fill in for Ric Flair in several tag team matches, pairing up with Barry Windham against Lex Luger and Sting. Harley would continue to work a program with Rich through the rest of the summer, as well as facing Brian Pillman and Wendell Cooley. In September, he received several United States Heavyweight Championship title shots against the then champion Lex Luger. In October, Harley renewed his rivalry with the Junkyard Dog in 2 matches on the WCW house show circuit and finished the year facing Michael Wall Street. During a house show in St. Joseph, Missouri on December 7, 1990, Harley sustained a shoulder injury and would ultimately retire from active competition. He transitioned to the role of manager and had success. Harley made his first subsequent appearance 6 months later as a guest referee during a house show on June 14, 1991 in St. Louis, Missouri. 1 year after making his initial return on the Great American Bash in 1990, Harley returned at the 1991 Great American Bash to become the advisor/manager to Lex Luger. Excelling as a manager, as he had as a wrestler, he immediately led Luger to the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. He managed Luger throughout his title run, as well as acquiring the contract for Mr. Hughes from Alexandria, New York. In 1992, Harley began to add other wrestlers to a stable that would include Big Van Vader, Super Invader, and Vinny Vegas. The stable was short-lived, and after Vader defeated Sting for the World Championship on July 12, 1992, he became Harley's primary charge. The wily veteran was popular among the young WCW talent and developed close friendships with Mick Foley and Steve Austin, among others. Harley returned to the ring a final time on a trio of Florida house shows in November of 1993, when he substituted for an injured Vader to face Ric Flair. His former rival would come out victorious on each occasion. These would be the last wrestling matches of his career. After losing the title at Starrcade in December 1993, Vader quickly became Harley's sole stable member again. Harley continued to manage Vader in the following months in rematches against Flair, and on May 22, 1994, he was inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame during the Slamboree pay-per-view. He continued to appear at Vader's side through the rest of the year. His fourth wife, Beverly, was vice president of the Commerce Bank of Kansas City. They married in late 1995, shortly after Harley's career-ending car crash. She often traveled with Harley until she died of pneumonia. As his early wrestling career had been nearly derailed due to a car accident, another car accident in January 1995 forced Harley out of the wrestling business altogether. Harley required a hip replacement surgery, which, along with injuries accumulated after years in the ring, prevented him from even being a manager. Harley would make a few independent appearances against Flair, but his inability to work was just too great. Harley would make one last return to WCW television in October 1999 as a ring announcer for the Bret Hart vs. Chris Benoit tribute to Owen Hart match in his hometown of Kansas City. With his in-ring career finished, Harley founded World League Wrestling in 1999 near his home in Eldon. The promotion also served as a training school for the would-be professional wrestlers and other independent promoters from across the region. At present, WLW runs shows in Troy, Missouri. Harley returned to WWE television in 2004, shortly after being inducted into their Hall of Fame. On an episode of Raw, Randy Orton confronted Harley and spat in his face, to go with Orton's legend killer persona. Harley returned again for Raw's WWE Homecoming episode in October 2005, marking the show's return to the USA Network. Harley, along with the other legends who were in the ring, gave Rob Conway a lesson in respect. In 2004, Harley was recruited to be part of Total Nonstop Action Wrestling as a member of their NWA Championship Committee. Despite reportedly being an authority figure as a member of the committee, he never made any official decisions and only made the occasional on-screen appearance for the company. At the WWE Hall of Fame Class of 2007 ceremony, Harley and Dusty Rhodes were inducted into the Four Horsemen by Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. On the August 8, 2008 episode of Monday Night Raw, Harley sat in the front row and was acknowledged by commentators Michael Cole and Jerry the King Lawler. Before the show, Harley accompanied GHC heavyweight champion Takeshi Morishima to the ring for a dark match against Charlie Haas. Harley made an appearance at Total Nonstop Action Wrestling's Lockdown pay-per-view in 2007 as a special guest gatekeeper for the main event. He also made a special guest appearance at the second night of Ring of Honor's Glory of Honor 6, Night 2 at the Manhattan Center on November 3, 2007. On January 4, 2014, Harley took part in New Japan Pro Wrestling's Wrestling Kingdom 8 in the Tokyo Dome, participating in the title presentation before a match for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship and punching out defending champion Rob Conway's manager Bruce Tharp. Harley continued to run World League Wrestling and his wrestling camp in Eldon, Missouri. He later moved the business to Troy. Many of his trainees were sent to the NOAH promotion in Japan for extra experience. Over the years, he needed surgery to his neck, hip replacements, knee replacements, and had 5 vertebrae in his back fused together due to the years of taking hard bumps. In May 2017, he broke both his legs at a fall in his home, one in several places. He needed 4 blood transfusions during surgery. Harley would continue to promote WLW until his death while in rehab. On March 1st, 2019, Harley's close friend Ric Flair announced that Harley was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. One day later, CWFH promoter Dave Marquez said that while he was indeed diagnosed with lung cancer, it was not terminal. On August 1st, 2019, it was revealed by longtime friend Dustin Rhodes that Harley had died from lung cancer at the age of 76. He was buried next to his parents and one other brother at the Quitman Cemetery along Highway 113 in Quitman, Missouri. During his time, he was considered as one of the toughest men behind the scenes, king of the ring, and the greatest wrestler on God's green earth. He had 5 grandchildren. Post-career, Harley was inducted into several halls of fame for his achievements: the WCW Hall of Fame, the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame, the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum, the WWE Hall of Fame, the NWA Hall of Fame, the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame, and the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. That was the story of the King of Wrestling, Harley Race.
Well, you might think you drive.
So I want all you people out there, I want you to get your brothers, get your sisters, get your daddy, get them all around the TV. Because you fixed to eyewitness something right here on TV today, baby.
Terry Gordy was a professional wrestler from Chattanooga, Tennessee, who was born in 1961. A standout high school football and baseball player at Rossville High School, Terry dropped out at the age of 14 after getting into trouble with the law and being bailed out of jail by his uncle. He began his pro wrestling career initially for the International Wrestling Association and later would form the Fabulous Freebirds with Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts, who was added to the group. Along with the dozens of titles he won throughout his career, arguably one of the high points was becoming the very first Universal Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion and holding the belt for 6 months. During his career, he would make stops in Georgia Championship Wrestling, Memphis, Mid-South Wrestling, WCCW, All Japan Pro Wrestling, WWF, WCW, USWA, Global Wrestling Federation, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, ECW, International Wrestling Association in Japan, and WAR. During a flight to Japan in 1993 for one of his frequent All Japan tours, Terry allegedly took approximately 50 pain pills, resulting in an overdose on the flight that left him in a coma. It would be 5 days before he regained consciousness, unfortunately with permanent brain damage. At 6'4" and almost 300 pounds, Terry never had a problem handling himself either in or out of the ring, but this incident, along with years of drug abuse, heavy drinking, and taking chair shots to the head, would prove to take a toll on his mental and physical health. Those close to him said he was never the same. He wrestled his last match returning to IWA Japan on February 4th, 2001. He ultimately passed away later that same year at the age of 40, leaving behind a career spanning 27 years. He was inducted into the Southern Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum, and the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the Fabulous Freebirds. This is the story of Terry Bam Bam Gordy.
Well, I left Chattanooga, boy, had $1 and a dime. Headed out for Nashville on the Hard Rock Line.
Terry Gordy was born on April 23, 1961 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He attended Rossville High School, where he was a standout football and baseball player. He dropped out of high school following his freshman year. He was a big wrestling fan growing up, watching NWA out of Tennessee run by Nick Goulas and Roy Welsh, watching stars such as Jackie Fargo, Tojo Yamamoto, and the Interns. He began wrestling in early 1974 at the age of 14 by lying about his age. Trained by Don Carson and the Mongolian stomper Archie Goldie in Knoxville. He started out in Lakeview, Georgia as one of the masked scavengers. Throughout 1974 and most of 1975, he would wrestle mostly tag team matches under a mask, worried that someone might recognize him and jeopardize his career because he was technically still a minor. One of his first televised matches was against veteran Big Cat Ernie Ladd sometime in 1975, known as Terry Mecca. He would also form a tag team with Gino Brito, facing teams such as the Mongols. In mid-1976, he returned to his hometown of Chattanooga, working for Lou Thez, and again would perform under a mask, this time as Mr. Wrestling 3, but would also use the name Terry Meeker, occasionally teaming with his kayfabe brother Jerry Meeker. In June of 1977, he would then travel to Nova Scotia, where he would feud with David Schultz, but before the end of the summer he would return to Memphis and would continue his series of matches with Dr. D, and would also tag a handful of times with the young Robert Gibson and Norvell Austin. According to Terry, he didn't last long because of his lack of interview skills, but before the year was up, he would relocate to Mississippi working for the Great Mephisto in his International Championship Wrestling promotion, making $40 a night working 6 days a week. On January 14th of 1978 in Greenwood, Mississippi, he beat Bill Ash to win the vacant ICW Mississippi title in the tournament final. In February of that year, he met Michael Hayes, who is known as Lord Michael Hayes. Even though he thought Hayes was arrogant and cocky, they became partners. They would wrestle their first match as a tag team on February 16th against the Mongols, which would be the start of their lifelong friendship. When Terry was given a $10 raise per night and Michael wasn't, they both left in December of that year. Terry, still Mississippi heavyweight champion, went back to Memphis to work for Welsh and Goulas. Michael Hayes would now be known as Pretty Boy Michael Hayes, and they officially became the Fabulous Freebirds, and after a short time became NWA Mid-America champions, feuding with the Mexican Angel, Dutch Mantel, as well as Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee, selling out the Mid-South Coliseum regularly. The Freebirds became extremely popular, and at the time were the only wrestlers using ring entrance music. Initially, Terry thought the music had no place in wrestling, but Hayes talked him into it. They would then head to Louisiana, where Bill Watts was running shows. They would spend half of 1980 feuding with Buck Robley and the Junkyard Dog. One of the most popular angles was when Michael Hayes blinded Junkyard Dog with the Freebird hair cream. Bill Watts over the years would fire Terry several times for being late and drinking too much. Bill Watts thought Michael was a better talker than wrestler, so he teamed Terry with Buddy Roberts, and Michael would manage the duo. By the end of 1980, they ended up in Georgia as they were looking for international exposure, and the territory was being shown on TBS, alongside stars such as Austin Idol, Tommy Rich, and Dusty Rhodes. According to Terry, Ole Anderson came up with the Freebird rule, which allowed any two members of the three-man team to wrestle in the match, as Michael was sick of just doing all the talking and wanted to take part in the match. Throughout the first half of 1981, the Birds had some of the biggest feuds and the most legendary matches in the history of GCW. In one of the famous matches shown on WTBS, now known as the Pile Driver match, Terry Gordy gave Ted DiBiase 4 consecutive pile drivers, which led DiBiase being taken away in an ambulance. During their time in Georgia in early 1982, Terry would form a team with Jimmy Snuka and turn on Michael, and they briefly feuded. With Hayes as a hero and Gordy as a villain, Hayes and Gordy eventually patched up their differences and reformed the Freebirds as a duo in the Dothan Farm Center. They feuded with Ole Anderson and Stan Hansen over the NWA World Tag Team titles throughout the summer of 1982. After a brief stint in Pensacola in the Gulf Coast Territory and returning to Georgia for a few months, in October of 1982, they would make their way to World Class Championship Wrestling in Texas, where they began their legendary feud with the Von Erichs. According to Terry, David Von Erich was the best worker out of all the brothers. In November, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy beat Bill Irwin and King Kong Bundy to win the NWA World Class Tag Team titles. In early 1984, the Freebirds made their debut in Japan, where Terry would travel to frequently, working for All Japan Pro Wrestling.
Been saving every penny for to make up through the fall. Working for that dollar, but it never adds up at all.
The Freebirds spent a brief time in the World Wrestling Federation in late 1984 with several matches against the Moondogs, but were fired after missing a show and showing up late and drunk, and according to rumors were kicked out of the locker room by Andre the Giant. During the Freebirds' extremely brief WWF run, they had David Wolf as their manager, who was the real-life manager of Cyndi Lauper. Individually, the Freebirds had all their strengths and weaknesses, but together as one unit they were nearly flawless. Although they were a headache at times to the various promoters they worked for, their bad boy image wasn't really an image at all, as they wrestled hard and partied just as hard. Promoters would often overlook their transgressions outside the ring because they filled arenas and made lots of money wherever they went. Gordy, Roberts, and Hayes were heat magnets, and whether it was feuding with the Von Erichs or winning the titles in Georgia or Mid-South territories, the fabulous Freebirds were all about success.
Coming around the riverbank where the old train whistle sang. The very next thing you hear from me, I've been tied to a ball and chain.
In 1985, Terry was banned from flying on Northwest Orient Airlines ever again. The lifetime ban was due to his behavior on at least one flight to Japan, where Gordy was intoxicated and was harassing several other passengers, including the airline staff. Because traveling to Japan was vital to Terry's livelihood, the Freebird needed to get himself back on the airline. Terry decided to use another person's name to book a flight. The name he used was a fellow wrestler, Curt Hennig. When the airline discovered that Curt Hennig was really Terry Gordy, both were blacklisted from flying with them. It is unknown if Hennig was ever aware that Gordy used his name to book the flight. It is also unknown if he was ever reinstated on Northwest Orient Airlines. The Freebirds would leave Texas and work for Vern Gagne in the AWA for a short time before leaving when Bill Watts started up the UWF. Terry started his feud with Steve Williams and began wrestling more as a singles wrestler, and in 1986 became the first UWF champion, which he would hold for 6 months before forfeiting the title to the One-Man Gang. In 1986, the Angel of Death became the bodyguard to the Freebirds. He would soon turn on the Freebirds and join Skandar Akbar's Devastation Incorporated, turning the Freebirds into babyfaces. According to The Observer, around this time, Terry Gordy blew out his knee so bad that he needed surgery. But when the doctor told him he would be out of action for 6 months to a year, he informed the doctor that all of a sudden his leg wasn't hurting as bad. They would then bounce between WCCW and Georgia Championship Wrestling. In late 1987, Iceman Parsons joined Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts after Michael Hayes left the Freebirds to help them get revenge on him. Parsons was now known as the Blackbird. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin would also team with the Freebirds in WCCW and other territories. In 1989, the Freebirds would make their way to WCW in full force, and this time officially add Jimmy Garvin to the mix. Together, Garvin and Hayes won the WCW World Tag Team titles, the United States Tag Team titles, and the WCW World Six-Man titles. Jimmy, being a pilot, talked Terry into training to become a pilot as well, until a rough landing during a training session ended with Terry clipping a gas truck with the wing of the plane. The Freebirds concept was heavily derived from the Leonard Skinner song Freebird and the image of Southern pride evoked by the band. For most of the team's early existence, the song was used as their entrance music in both television and live appearances. On occasion, they would also enter the ring to Willie Nelson's rendition of Georgia on My Mind. The Freebirds are sometimes credited as the first wrestlers to use entrance music, although others, including Gorgeous George, use of Pomp and Circumstance, and Big Daddy's use of We Shall Not Be Moved, and Chris Colt's use of Welcome to My Nightmare by Alice Cooper, all predate the Freebirds. During the mid-1980s, a number of North American wrestling promotions who licensed copywritten music faced difficulties in continuing those licenses. Other promotions which did not license music were under scrutiny for the practice. Promotions began looking for solutions. The WWF, which hired Jimmy Hart and Jim Johnson in 1985, used their talents to write and produce music under which the copyrights could be controlled by the company. Around the same time, Michael Hayes recorded the song Bad Street USA and released a music video, which included other Freebird members. The song would be used as entrance music for the Freebirds from that point forward, though they would use other songs on occasion. During 1990, Terry would feud with Lex Luger and would run into 1991, but didn't think Lex was a good wrestler. Diamond Dallas Page came to World Championship Wrestling in 1991 as a manager of the Fabulous Freebirds, Jimmy Garvin and Michael Hayes. Page managed the Freebirds to a shot to the NWA World Tag Team Championship, where they defeated Doom, Butch Reed, and Ron Simmons. Before the match took place, Page unveiled the stable's new road manager, Big Daddy Dink, formerly known as Oliver Humperdinck. In keeping with the Freebirds' rock and roll band gimmick, he was referred to as their tour manager / road boss. By this time, Terry was spending most of his time in Japan. At the Clash of Champions, he would face Dr. Death Steve Williams, who he would also form a tag team with while in Japan, and later in 1992, the two would feud with the Steiners in WCW.
Well, come this time tomorrow, reckon I don't know where I'll be. But if it wasn't for that old sheriff, I'd be back in Tennessee.
During a flight to Japan in August of 1993, for one of his frequent all-Japan tours, Terry would allegedly take roughly 50 pain pills, resulting in an overdose on the flight that left him in a coma. It would be 5 days before Terry emerged from the coma, unfortunately with permanent brain damage. Whether or not this damage could have been avoided had the incident not happened on a flight across the world is nothing but speculation. But one thing for certain is that the once imposing muscle of the Fabulous Freebirds would now be a shell of his former self. Friends in the business would go on to note that the previously happy Terry Gordy was now more calm, almost in a constant state of confusion, which ended his relationship with All Japan Pro Wrestling. During a shoot interview with RF Video, Terry apologized to his fans for the incident. During 1994, he would only wrestle a handful of matches for the Global Wrestling Federation. In February 1995, Terry made his first appearance as the Executioner, teaming with Mike Bell, losing to the Smoking Guns. He would be sent to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, teaming with Tommy Rich as the Militia. He would feud with Brad Armstrong and even won the Smoky Mountain Heavyweight Championship, defeating Armstrong. A month later, he dropped the title back to Armstrong in a country whipping match. Terry left SMW before it closed its doors at the end of the year. During 1995, he would also return to Japan, now working for IWA, and had several matches with Cactus Jack. In 1996, Gordy appeared in Extreme Championship Wrestling to challenge Raven for the ECW World Heavyweight title as the internationally recognized #1 contender. He also wrestled Bam Bam Bigelow at Ultimate Jeopardy in what was billed as the Battle of the Bam Bams. Terry lost the match due to the outside interference from the Eliminators. He was then called back up to the WWF. In 1996, he teamed with Mankind, both managed by Paul Bearer, and feuded with The Undertaker. The Executioner came to the ring under a mask and carrying an axe as Paul Bearer's hired assassin. His finishing move was a deadly Asiatic spike. He made his TV debut at the In Your House pay-per-view Buried Alive when he interfered in The Undertaker's Buried Alive match with Mankind, hitting The Undertaker with a shovel and burying him with the help of Mankind and several other wrestlers. However, at In Your House 12 It's Time, The Undertaker defeated The Executioner in an Armageddon Rules match. Dave Meltzer gave the match 2.5 stars. For anyone that knew Terry, it was kinda sad, and tough to watch as Terry was considered a wrestling prodigy, but at this point he was just a shell of his former self. Undertaker, growing up in Texas and a Freebirds fan, wanted so much to try and help Terry, but the plane incident in 1993 was still greatly affecting him. According to Bruce Pritchard, it was a sad scene and hard to watch. Terry left the promotion shortly afterwards. His final televised appearance was on January 12, 1997 on WWF Superstars when he lost to Goldust, after which Paul Bearer turned on him by hitting him with his urn. He was advertised to be one of the 38 participants in the 1997 Royal Rumble match, but did not make his appearance. He returned to WWF one last time in a house show as the Executioner on April 28, 1998, losing to Wellington Wilkins. According to several sources, Terry was brought in as a favor to Michael Hayes, who was working backstage, but he wasn't the same in the ring, and to protect his legacy, they hid his identity in case things didn't work out. Had Gordy been able to compete at a high level, there would have been the opportunity to later unmask. Terry returned to Japan, working for International Wrestling Association of Japan, where he wrestled in death matches, mainly working in tag teams. He left IWA Japan in 1997. In 1998, he returned to Japan for the final time working for Wrestle Association R. After leaving the WWF in Japan, Terry worked in the independent circuit. On February 21, 1998, he teamed with Dan Severn in a losing effort to Doug Gilbert and Dutch Mantell at the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Show for IWA Mid-South. Terry would reunite with Hayes as they fought Glenn Kulka and JR Smooth to a no contest for Power Pro Wrestling on May 28, 1999. He wrestled his last match returning to IWA Japan in February of 2001. Terry died of a heart attack caused by a blood clot on July 16, 2001. In 2014, he was inducted into the Southern Wrestling Hall of Fame. A year later, he was also inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum, and on April 2, 2016, he was inducted by his son into the WWE Hall of Fame as part of the Fabulous Freebirds. According to Jim Ross on his Grilling JR podcast, Terry's drug issues were one of the main reasons he didn't have a big singles run during the 1990s. Jim Ross would state, "There was nothing he couldn't do in the ring. Terry was extraordinary. When he was 15 or 16, he was already the size of a grown man and already well beyond his experience level. He was a natural. Anything to do with wrestling, he would have been a success. Terry Gordy would have been a huge success because he was that athletic big man that promoters loved. Big athletes that turned heads in airports. His personality was bigger than life. Not denigrating Buddy or Michael Hayes, but the Freebird three-man team, Terry was the star of the show. He was as good as super heavyweight or 300-pound guys I ever saw. He was extraordinary." Nikita Koloff recalled his first and only trip to Japan. He said he was at a bar after the matches with Terry and claimed that Terry became a different person when he became drunk. He would get rowdy, then angry, then uncontrollable. On this occasion, Terry started by throwing drink glasses at the wall. After that, he took a fire extinguisher and started spraying the contents throughout the bar. He then threw the extinguisher out the window. Realizing that the police were called, I dragged him out of the bar and back to the hotel. Terry Gordy was a big star in Japan, and it was Nikita who took the brunt of the heat from the Japanese officials after they were notified about the incident. Nikita claimed he was never asked back to do another tour after that. Michael Hayes would record a song called Freebird Road, a heartfelt tribute to his best friend, and filmed part of the video at the grave of Terry Gordy. The reaction to Hayes' tribute was overwhelmingly positive. Many WWE superstars view the song as a fitting honor for the legendary grappler, and many who competed with and against Terry were also touched by the song. Most importantly to Hayes was the reaction from the Gordy family. With Michael Hayes as the mouthpiece, Buddy Roberts as the technician, and Terry Gordy, the muscle who could do it all in the ring, and among many wrestling fans' top 10 list of greatest in-ring performers. Even in Japan, where they rarely pay tribute to American wrestlers who passed away, Terry was given a 10-bell salute. That was the story of Terry Bam Bam Gordy.
Buy yourself a postcard so you can see the lights of town. Find yourself a country girl, keep quiet and settle down.
Sensational Sherri, or Sherri Martel, was born Sherri Lynn Russell in Birmingham, Alabama. Her first exposure to professional wrestling was attending the matches with her mother, originally not a fan, but would go to get out of babysitting her younger sister. Eventually growing to love the sport, by 16 she approached Grizzly Smith, who told her to come back in 5 years. After a brief marriage and having a son, she returned and began training under Butch Moore and eventually the Fabulous Moolah. In her career, she would make appearances in several promotions, but most notably in the AWA, WWF, and later WCW. Along with holding the AWA Women's Championship, she would also hold titles in the IWA and the WWF. But her role that would bring her the most recognition would be that of the manager of Randy Macho Man Savage during his run as the Macho King. Her last match was in 2005 at Wrestle Union 1, and in 2006, she would be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. In 2007, she ultimately passed away at her mother's house at the age of 49. During a time when men dominated and controlled the business, Sherri made her mark in the industry as one of the greatest female performers of all time, both as a wrestler and a manager. This is the story of sensational Sherri Martel. Sherri Lynn Russell was born in Birmingham, Alabama on February 8, 1958. As a young child, she initially hated wrestling, but started going to TV tapings and an old cattle auction barn with her mother to get out of babysitting her younger sister, and was instantly hooked, watching stars such as Cowboy Bob Kelly, Frank Dalton, and the Stomper Archie Goldie. She was instantly in awe and always cheered for the bad guys and would dream about stepping in the ring herself. After years of going to matches with her mom, she fell in love and decided that's what she wanted to do. At 16, she approached Grizzly Smith and asked him how to get into the business, and was told it would eat her alive and to come back when she was 21. During her high school years, Sherri was a standout athlete participating in track and field and baseball. At 21, she was already married and separated and had a baby. She went back and had breakfast with Grizzly Smith and told him she still wanted to be a wrestler, as her marriage failed and she still longed to be in showbiz. She went to Butch Moore's wrestling school and spent her last $1,500. As she sat in his office telling him she wanted to be a wrestler, he came around his desk and slapped her as hard as he could. She shook it off and said, "Is that all you got?" So he signed her up. During her training, he did everything possible to try and discourage her, but nothing would stand in the way of her dreams. If anything, it just made her more determined. She learned how to take bumps and work with men. After a year of training with Butch Moore, she spent some time working in Memphis. Longing for more than just working on the independent circuit, Sherri had another breakfast meeting with Grizzly Smith, who would hook her up with the fabulous Moolah. That same day, Sherri called the veteran and took the bus to Moolah Drive to meet her. Moolah ran a training camp for women wrestlers who would live right on the property. Sherri would train every day from 7 a.m. until noon amongst the likes of Leilani Kai, Wendy Richter, and Judy Martin. Sherri would admit that was the best training at the time, but was not crazy about the 25% booking fee on all her bookings, which was to be paid to Moolah. Sherri would comment, "I started in Memphis, probably in late 1979. I was there with a small group. There was a small school there, and then I went to Moolah School to get polished up. I was there for about a year, and then I got hurt. I got my knee dislocated and quit for about 3 years. Then I went through Memphis touring and started again. Jim Cornette was my first manager." In 1980, green and scared, she made her first trip to Japan with Judy Martin. After the initial culture shock, her trip to Japan was a success and became one of many. At this time, women on the card were still considered a special attraction. Moolah changed Sherri's name to Sherri Martel when she sent her to wrestle in Japan. After her trip to Japan, she would return to the Memphis territory. This wouldn't be the break Sherri was looking for. Moolah would allege that Sherri enjoyed partying way too much and would not concentrate on her chosen career path. In the summer of 1982, she made her first handful of WWF appearances, which included appearances in Madison Square Garden, teaming with the fabulous Moolah, defeating Judy Martin and Penny Mitchell. In August of that year, she would also face Moolah in a handful of title matches for the women's title. In 1985, she went to AWA. She flew to Minneapolis from Nashville and upgraded to first class and met Stan Hansen on the plane, who put in a good word for her. Her first match in AWA was against Debbie Coombs. After a few days in Minnesota, she met with Vern Gagne and was signed to a contract. Making her on-screen debut at Superclash 1985, Sherri feuded with Candy Devine and would go on to win the AWA Women's Championship on 3 occasions. She moved to Minneapolis and was now full-time with AWA, and would have an ongoing feud with Candy Devine for most of her time in the promotion. By 1987, the AWA was in decline. Jesse Ventura, who jumped ship to the WWF, suggested Sherri speak to Vince McMahon. She was about to hit the big time in the World Wrestling Federation. Her debut on July 21, 1987 was also against Candy Devine in Fort Worth, Texas, and was announced as the AWA Women's Champion. On July 24th, she would face her former trainer, the Fabulous Moolah, in a house show in Texas, whom she would defeat. Pritchard claimed that Moolah worked stiff in the ring and attempted to blow Sherri up due to her cardio not being in peak condition. Sherri thankfully overcame the tough start to have a greater run. She turned heel shortly after, now calling herself Sensational Sherri. Through 1987, she would have several matches against Velvet McIntyre, Debbie Coombs, and Rockin' Robin. She would hold the title for 15 months, but her reign was relatively uneventful, in most part because the WWF at the time rarely televised women's matches. She would drop the belt to Rockin' Robin at a house show in Paris on October 7, 1988. Throughout this time, she would also play the role of Peggy Sue during the Honky Tonk Man's Intercontinental title reign. By 1989, WWF was starting to phase out women's wrestling. Realizing this, Sherri would transition into a full-time manager. She had briefly managed in the AWA, so did have experience at ringside. Despite being an excellent in-ring performer, this would be the role many WWF fans would remember her for. At SummerSlam 1989, Randy Savage teamed with Zeus to take on Hulk Hogan and Bruce the Barber Beefcake. Sherri would interfere for the heels. Elizabeth would make the save, attacking Sherri. As a result, Beefcake and Hogan would ultimately be victorious. After the match, Beefcake chopped off the villainous Sherri's hair to a thunderous response. In reality, this had been fake hair extensions added for the show. Shortly after SummerSlam, Savage would defeat Hacksaw Jim Duggan to become King of the Ring of the WWF. Sherri would be named Sensational Queen Sherri and continue to interfere on Savage's behalf. In April 1990, she became known as Queen Sherri and would tag with Randy Savage in a mixed tag match against Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire in WrestleMania. For the next year, she would pull double duty both as the manager of Randy Savage and face Sapphire on a regular basis, who was not a trained wrestler, but it was up to Sherri to make the matches look believable. Sapphire wore the same ring gear every night and would not shower regularly. Sherri was angry about the gear smelling bad and allegedly forced Sapphire in the women's locker room shower against her will to send a cruel message. During her 2 years with Randy Savage, when she wasn't paying for her mother's house, she spent $175,000 on wardrobes. She even witnessed Savage's rumored attention to detail during his match with the Ultimate Warrior in WrestleMania 7. At WrestleMania, the Savage and Sherri association would end when Savage lost a career-ending match with the Ultimate Warrior. After the match, Sherri attacked Savage, berating him for the defeat. Elizabeth would attack Sherri. This reunited Savage and Elizabeth, turning him face in the process. Later, she would comment on her time with Savage. "Randy, in his own way, he made me take off. He'd always tell me we were going to the airport. I looked through the world with pink sunglasses on, and I never knew what that meant until I went through a bad divorce, and he helped pull me through it. I found out what he meant by looking through the world in rose-colored glasses." Sherri would not be a free agent for long. In the summer of 1991, she started to accompany the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase to the ring. She would remain with Ted until 1992. Sherri began managing Shawn Michaels after Pat Patterson convinced Michaels to participate in the storyline. In February 1990, this new role. Michaels was the egocentric younger man, while Sherri played the cougar-style character, willing to do anything for her boy toy. Sherri even sang Shawn's new theme song, Sexy Boy. In the summer of 1992, Shawn Michaels and the model Rick Martel would battle over Sherri's affections. This would culminate in a bout at SummerSlam 92, resulting in a double countout. This was a heel versus heel match that was a rarity at the time. Later that year, Sherri would be involved in a storyline where she was caught in the crossfire between Michaels and Marty Jannetty. This led to Sherri being struck by Michaels' mirror. Sherri would take some time off television. It was unclear if she would be by Michaels' side upon her return. Later in an interview, she would state, "I watched Shawn develop from a good guy with the Rockers in the AWA to a very classic heel. I never thought in a million years that I would be managing him years later. It shows you how crazy this business is and how many changes and turns that it can take. He developed his character so well for his age, and he is one of the nicest people I have ever met in my life." The storyline, however, was cut short as Jannetty was released from the company in the midst of the feud. Sherri spent the remainder of the year aligned with Tatanka, who aided her in her feud with Luna Vachon and Bam Bam Bigelow. Sherri made her last WWF in-ring appearance on July 10, 1993 against Luna Vachon in a house show in Seattle. She was released from the World Wrestling Federation during the summer. 2 reasons had been given for Sherri's departure: her decision to enroll in cosmetology school and failing drug tests. The rumors surrounding Sherri Martel's WWF departure were confirmed by Bruce Pritchard on his podcast. Sherri was a user of marijuana when WWF started to cut down on everything that was considered a drug at the time. The refusal to stop using marijuana led Sherri opting to leave the company. Society had changed so much now that someone losing their job for weed would likely see a huge uproar against WWF, but she was a victim of the time. Towards the end of her time in the WWF, Sherri participated in a WWF invasion angle in the USWA, reuniting with Savage. Sherri would suffer a similar embarrassment to that which she had suffered at the hands of the Warrior when she ran to the ring to aid Savage in a steel cage match in Memphis against his old enemy, Jerry the King Lawler. But after accidentally knocking Savage from the ring, she had her dress yanked off by Lawler as she climbed the cage to escape. After her WWF release, Sherri had a brief run in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, siding with Tracy Smothers in a feud with Tammy Sytch, Brian Lee, as well as several intergender matches with Jim Cornette. She would also make several appearances in ECW. Sherri signed with World Championship Wrestling in 1994. The original plan was for her to manage Kevin and Dave Sullivan against Missy Hyatt and the Nasty Boys, but after Hyatt was fired in February 1994, the proposed rivalry went on with no managers for either team. She made her debut on the April 23rd edition of WCW Saturday Night under the name Sensuous Sherri. In an interview with Gene Okerlund, she said her goal was to find a man that could bring her the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. At Bash at the Beach, Sherri tried to help Flair defeat Hogan in a match by giving him brass knuckles but failed. After the feud's climatic battle in a steel cage at Halloween Havoc, Sherri climbed the cage to aid Flair and in the process had her dress pulled off by Jimmy Hart, who was Hogan's manager at the time, leaving her dangling from the cage in black lingerie. WCW pitched the idea of Sherri managing a young Triple H and William Regal when the duo was experimenting as a team. Triple H's WCW stint ended before it could take off, as WWF was his ultimate goal. Sherri likely would have helped Triple H get over in the WCW instead of having it become a forgotten part of his past. Next, Sherri began managing Harlem Heat, Booker T, and Stevie Ray using the name Sister Sherri. She managed the team to 7 WCW World Tag Team Championship reigns. Booker T loved working with Sherri due to her great help managing him and Stevie Ray as Harlem Heat. WCW placed Sherri with the heel tag team to give them more momentum moving forward. Booker shared a story on his radio show about Sherri being one of the toughest people in all of WCW. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, working in a match with Harlem Heat, saw Sherri slapping him so hard that he broke character. The anger of Duggan came since the slap felt stiffer than any of the moves he was taking in the ring from Booker and Stevie. In late 1994, while still managing Harlem Heat in WCW, Sherri made a return appearance in ECW, managing Shane Douglas and Brian Pillman against Ron Simmons and Too Cold Scorpio. Back in WCW, Sherri had a brief on-screen romance with Colonel Robert Parker until October 1996 when Harlem Heat fired him and Sherri had a match with him at World War III in November. She continued to manage Harlem Heat until she got fired from the group in July of 1997 on Nitro. She was let go by WCW for showing up at work impaired at a television taping. After leaving WCW, Sherri won the IWA Mid-South Women's title, defeating Debbie Combs in August 1997. A few weeks later, she dropped the title back to Combs. On October 1999, she appeared on the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view managing George Steele in a match against Greg Valentine. Also in 1999, she was awarded the AWA Superstars Women's Championship. In 2000, she made 3 wrestling television appearances with World Championship Wrestling. The first was at the sold-out 2000 pay-per-view event, watching at ringside along with other superstars. the Chris Benoit vs. Sid Vicious matchup for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The second, she had a match with Mona, which she also lost. By 2003, she was living in Tennessee with her second husband, Robert Schrull, where she helped him renovate homes. Her and her husband had been living next door to her mother. Sherri had bought her mother a trailer when she was making money in wrestling. However, she had not been doing well financially and badly needed lower back surgery due to constant pain. She apparently was hoping WWE would offer to pay for her surgery during the weekend she was inducted into the Hall of Fame. She wrestled her very last match at Wrestle Union on January 29, 2005, teaming with Peggy Lee Arthur, Amber O'Neil, and Christy Vane, losing to Wendy Richter, Malia Hosaka, Bambi, and Jenny Taylor. In 2005, she took part in a World Wrestling Entertainment storyline with Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle for WrestleMania 21. She made a return to SmackDown, singing a parody of Michaels' theme song with Angle. She was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by Ted DiBiase in April 2006. Later that year, she worked for TNA Wrestling, taping a backstage vignette trying to offer her managerial services to free agent Bobby Roode that aired on September 21, 2006. It was her last wrestling television appearance. Reports indicated that Sherri was hoping to work more with TNA, either on screen or behind the scenes, by asking if anything was available. TNA opted against bringing her in, but one positive came from this was WWF was adding her to their Hall of Fame afterwards. On June 15, 2007, Sherri died at her mother's residence in McCalla, Alabama, near Birmingham. She was 49 years old. On September 11, 2007, investigators released a toxicology report stating that she had died of an overdose with multiple drugs in her system, including high amounts of oxycodone. She was cremated after her death. That was the story of sensational Sherri Martel. Pop culture, whether it be famous actors, musicians, or athletes, has a way of ingraining memories into our brain that could last a lifetime. One mention of a song, a specific movie, or even a certain toy can ignite nostalgic thoughts in our minds that brings us back to our childhood. But what really goes on for some of these icons who provide us with these lifelong impressions in our memory bank long after their time in the spotlight? Many drift into obscurity, never to be heard from again, until a tragic event occurs in their life. With the creation of the internet and the rise in popularity of social media, many of these stars have resurfaced and piqued our interest once again. One question we always want to know is, what happened after they faded away from the spotlight, and what do they look like now? One WWF superstar who reached the peak of his career in the mid-1980s and resurfaced as the inception of shoot interviews became popular with fans is Billy Jack Haynes. Standing 6'3" and weighing over 250 pounds, Billy Jack had a superhero build and imposing look. At the height of his career, he wrestled in front of 93,000 fans against Hercules at WrestleMania 3. But that's not where his story in the public eye ends. In the last 2 decades, Billy Jack would appear in several shoot-style interviews, some of which he would talk about multiple conspiracy theories and even admit to being involved in unsolved murders.
What time I have left on this earth, you're probably going to be looking at a dead man, 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 dead man.
Former professional wrestler and Portland local William Haynes Jr., known in the ring as Billy Jack Haynes, is headed to jail. He's accused of killing his wife, 84-year-old Jeanette Beecraft. Haynes was previously held at a local hospital where he was treated for injuries unrelated to the crime. He now faces charges of second-degree murder and unlawful use of a weapon.
Born William Albert Haynes on July 10, 1953 in Portland, Oregon. For most of Billy's younger years, he had a stable childhood, but a string of abuse by his mother's sister's husband would leave Billy with a deep, dark secret at a young age. He started off training in boxing as early as 10 years old. At 15, he was 6'1", 175 pounds, and a light heavyweight with several amateur fights. But tragedy would soon strike, as his uncle, his father's brother, was in a fatal accident. 3 weeks later, his mom died as well. At that point in his life, he made a decision to look after his father and made him a priority for the rest of his life. After breaking his right hand in the boxing ring in 1977, it left him few options. He had already served 6 months in the army, but went AWOL when he found out his dad was sick and lost his eyesight to diabetes. Now working as a janitor, making $6 an hour, life wasn't the same. Billy was a lifelong wrestling fan. In early 1982, he went down to a Portland wrestling show to try and figure out how he was going to get his foot in the door. Although he did get the attention of promoter Don Owen, Don sent him to Calgary to train with Stu Hart. Billy took his last $200, filled his car up with gas, and drove to Calgary to chase his dream. He started training in Stu Hart's dungeon. According to CageMatch.net, his first recorded match was August 10, 1982 in Stampede Wrestling, and according to Billy, he was making around $25 a match. He would eventually become good friends with the Dynamite Kid, who took him under his wing. By fall of that year, he debuted in Portland Wrestling, immediately headlining cards and now making $1,000 to $1,500 a week. Simply known as Bill Haynes, he would later take on the moniker Billy Jack, and would later add his last name after legal threats by actor Tom Laughlin, who starred in the original Billy Jack movie. In 1983, he got married to female wrestler Jeannie Clark, who was also known as Lady Blossom, but they would split the following year. By 1984, feeling like his character was getting stale in the Pacific Northwest, he made his move to Florida Championship Wrestling, hoping to gain more experience, but more importantly to make more money. By November of that year, Billy would make his WWF debut against Jerry Valiant in Chicago, Illinois. After the match, Billy would get word from home that his dad had a stroke. Without hesitating, he immediately flew home to his dad and was fired by the WWF. In 1986, Billy won the Pacific Northwest heavyweight title from Bobby Jaggers, but behind the scenes, his appetite for Percocet and Vicodin was growing.
I said about a year ago I didn't know if I was going to retire or what. I've been training for 3 months, and I know you can hear me out there.
In May of 1996, Billy was contacted by WWF booker George Scott, and they were interested in giving him a second chance. After defeating Moondog Moretti in his farewell match on May 10th, Billy left Portland for New York, determined to take full advantage of the second chance. His first match in the Federation was against Frank Marconi on June 1st. Billy was now making between $8,000 to $10,000 per week, more money than he had ever made in his life. But almost immediately, he was finding it hard to keep up with the travel schedule, and his drug use became more rampant. Backstage, he was known for his quick temper and contrasting, soft-spoken demeanor. On March 27, 1987, the WWF would hold its annual extravaganza, WrestleMania. Its home that year, the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit, Michigan, in front of 93,000 fans. Billy would face Hercules in a battle of the full Nelson match. During a spot on the outside of the ring, the plan was Hercules would bust Billy open with his chain while scuffling outside the ring, but Billy was caught on camera pulling the razor blade out of his wrist tape. Despite the blunder, and although the match ended in a disappointing double countout, Billy's stock in the wrestling business had just risen dramatically. Injuries were piling up, and life on the road was taking its toll, both mentally and physically. By January, Billy was mostly involved in tag team matches, teaming up with Ken Patera, mostly putting over younger talent and newer teams, including Demolition. The circumstances surrounding Haynes' exit from the WWF in January '88 have sparked controversy, fueled by the evolving narrative as Billy recounted it over time. According to one account, when the WWF was coming through Portland, they wanted him to lose once again, but not wanting to come up short in his hometown, in front of his family and friends and beloved father, instead of being pinned in front of everyone, Billy decided to stay home and no-show the event. The WWF left Portland the following day. Billy Jack didn't. According to Greg Valentine, Billy took a substance called GHB on an airplane, and after passing out and beginning to drool out of the side of his mouth, the stewardess sought medical attention and had the pilot make an emergency landing. The incident got back to Vince, and Billy was fired. Billy was burnt out and needed time off. He had been going non-stop since he joined the Federation less than 2 years prior. But he did attempt to invest his money. Not only did he pay for his father's house, in September of 1987, he had opened his own gym. And in 1988, he began promoting his own shows under the Oregon Wrestling Federation banner in direct competition with Don Owen. He had done what most men only dream of: hit the big time hard enough to make enough money to get out sooner than later. Billy consistently voiced his criticism of his rival, the Owen promotion. Even though he had recruited several of his old friends from Owen, after hiring big names and only producing mediocre shows, Billy was soon spending over $5,000 every week of his own money. According to a report published by Willamette Wee, Haynes' fundamental strategy followed the traditional wrestling format. He would put on shows 6 days a week, primarily in inexpensive venues such as National Guard armories and high school gymnasiums across the state. They would also participate in charity events and county fairs. The pivotal Saturday event would occur in Oregon City, the OWF's hometown, at an arena conveniently situated near Billy Jack's gym. He secured a contract with KPDX Channel 44 to produce and broadcast his program. This particular show would be televised, serving as the primary advertising platform for the other 6 weekly events. However, what truly set Haynes' organization apart from all others was the caliber of its wrestlers. Drawing from his own experience, Haynes understood which incentives would entice talented, skilled performers to leave their current pursuits and journey to Oregon. When Billy Jack initiated his long-distance phone recruiting campaign, he dangled the irresistible bait of exceptionally high pay by regional standards, guarantees ranging from $800 to $1,000 per week. He also assured them of transportation, providing 2 chauffeured vans, one for the heroes and one for the villains. Wrestlers would receive a portion of their profits from merchandise such as posters, t-shirts, and even action figures based on their in-ring personas. Additionally, there would be extensive TV coverage, ample advertising, and every safety precaution available for ring work. Billy's summons attracted over a dozen wrestlers and a top-tier referee. Notable names like Portland's Kip the Crippler Oliver, Coco Samoa, Brian Adams, Mean Mike Miller, Moondog Moretti, and Gorgeous Joey Jackson relinquished stable positions with Don Owen Promotions. Others hailed from various states such as North Carolina, Florida, California, Tennessee, Missouri, and New York, with some relocating their families over vast distances. Some even abandoned lucrative careers outside of wrestling to heed Haynes' call. Mr. Magnificent, Kevin Kelly, a prominent figure in the Midwestern circuit, entrusted his Minneapolis car dealership to a manager and promptly flew to Portland upon receiving Billy Jack's invitation. By March and early April, the OWF started revealing cracks in its foundation. When Billy's business partner Kaplan requested a contract, Haynes declined. Even before Haynes' inaugural wrestling event, Kaplan withdrew from the venture, claiming to have taken with him over $100,000 worth of potential investors. Upon the wrestlers' arrival, Haynes requested that they work for half the guaranteed money, stating it was temporary until the promotion gets off the ground. Even at half pay, it exceeded what many of them had been earning in their prior territories. Following months of meticulous preparation, the highly anticipated OWF kickoff took place on Saturday night, May 7th, at the 2,000-seat Oregon City Civic Center. The OWF debut drew an audience of 1,800 people, but their attendance declined significantly thereafter. Only 550 showed up the following Saturday. While the Saturday night shows typically attracted between 300 and 600 ticket buyers, attendance for the other 6 nights either failed to materialize or rapidly dwindled. The shows during the week regularly drew crowds under 50. OWF performers began standing on street corners, handing out flyers in small Oregon towns. JT, Rock and Roll Southern, would comment, "I was completely humiliated. It was like we were begging people to come and see us wrestle. We would arrive in a town and nobody would know we were coming. There were no posters, no ads, no radio spots. Do you know what it's like to wrestle in front of 30 people? The worst feeling in the world is when you're in the dressing room lacing up your boots and you know there's only 30 people out there. But you've got to get up for it. They've paid their money and they deserve a show. You say, 'Oh Lord, let me get through this night.'" Initially in the main event of each card, Billy Jack eventually ceased to make appearances altogether in the road shows, wrestling solely on Saturday nights in Oregon City. Billy let himself go, said wrestler Bryan Adams. His hair was a mess, he didn't shower, he was in the worst shape of his life. He didn't even bother to put his teeth in anymore. When Billy's expectations of through-the-roof ticket sales didn't get off the ground, he started shorting the wrestlers on payouts. I was getting $400, explained Coco Samoa. Then one week he gave me $300 and told me he'd make up the difference the next week. The next week, he'd give me $200 and say he'd make it all up in the next check. But the next week it was down $150. For the first time in his 18-year wrestling career, he didn't have enough to pay his own rent. Payments were also lagging behind on utility and equipment bills, as well as the lease for the Oregon City Arena. The stress was wreaking havoc on Billy's sleep. Most of the original crew, including a referee, had already departed, resorting to borrowing money or selling and pawning belongings to fund their departure from Oregon. Billy surprised the remaining crew when he informed a local newspaper that the departing wrestlers had been released due to failing drug tests. On Friday, July 15th, the already strained relationship between Billy Jack and his team reached a breaking point. After receiving their $150 paychecks, all the wrestlers insisted on a meeting with Billy. Following 2 disastrous and badly arranged shows, the Oregon Boxing and Wrestling Commission refused to issue any more permits or licenses to Oregon Wrestling Federation. It was over. The venture had lasted less than 3 months. During the first days and weeks after the closure of OWF, a flood of enraged wrestlers and creditors, Billy hid out at his secret location and ignored all of his phone calls. He would eventually come out of hiding and issue the following statement. I was a promoter and it was my responsibility to make sure things got done. I didn't do it. I've lost my dream and I feel lower than a midget. I thought I was cut out to be a promoter, but I was wrong. I'm not a big enough prick. So after only a few months, he was down over $1 million and the promotion folded. At the same time, his gym also shut down. He had no choice but to go back to work for Don Owen. By the end of 1988, both his savings account and his list of friends had shrunk to almost nothing. Due to stress and a lack of exercise, he was in the worst physical shape he had ever been in before. He had a dozen creditors threatening lawsuits and was on the brink of bankruptcy. Billy would spend some time in Japan, but within a year, he was back in Portland working for Don Owen. By 1990, things would start looking up. Billy would debut in Herb Abrams' UWF, and in early 1991 would land a deal with WCW, appearing under a mask as Black Blood. According to Billy, after helping train Bryan Adams and helping him get into Portland wrestling, and then again help him to get into the WWF, Bryan gave him no respect. Bryan and an unnamed individual would contact Billy and inform him the WWF was in Texas and Billy had a tryout. Billy drove all the way from Portland to Texas, only to find out he had been ribbed. In 1993, Billy's beloved father passed away after months of watching his dad suffering and some nights screaming in pain. It was almost a blessing in disguise. But the void left in Billy's life would be impossible to fill. He would spend the next few years spiraling out of control, completely broke, but being recognized everywhere he went didn't help matters. He would bounce around throughout various territories until his official retirement from wrestling in early 1996. Directly after that, he went to host a short-lived radio show. By 1998, Billy was penniless and, for better or worse, still recognized everywhere he went. By September 2001, he would travel to every hospital and clinic in Oregon and lie to the nurses and doctors for the pain pill Vicodin. But the police were onto him, and he was soon arrested and charged. In 2002, now on federal probation, Billy made an attempt to change his life. He quit using drugs with the use of methadone, and his life was starting to finally feel normal. He admitted that his biggest fear in life was being a celebrity and people finding out he was a drug addict. In 2006, Billy ended up in a hospital when he was attacked outside a body shop in Portland. This was due to Billy allegedly skimming off the top while being a mule in a marijuana smuggling operation years ago after finding out he was being underpaid and lied to. Unbeknownst to him, he was transporting cocaine, not marijuana. According to Billy, he was beaten within an inch of his life. In 2014, Billy Jack Haynes sued the WWE, claiming he contracted hepatitis C during a bloody WWF wrestling match, also claiming the WWE went out of its way to put wrestlers in danger by encouraging steroid and cocaine use and hiding important medical information from wrestlers. At the time, he was demanding more than $5 million. In a 2017 interview, Jim Cornette would state, "Billy Jack was a different type of guy. I always thought he was a pleasant man to be around and never had a problem with him." He would also state, "Billy had somewhat of a temper, and as the story goes, he had killed a guy by knocking him down with a goofy punch and gotten into trouble over it, and as a result always tried to keep his temper in check. He was very soft-spoken and very calm guy in the locker room, but when he came into Dallas, there was an issue between him and Chris Adams. I believe in Portland they had wrestled together previously, where Chris ended up with the lady that Billy Jack had had before. When Billy debuted in Dallas for World Class, they booked him in Dallas and Chris left town for a week rather than have the match. I always enjoyed my conversations with Billy Jack and never had a problem with him in the world, and I would prefer not piss him off for anything." Billy later on would claim he had been witness to a high-profile unsolved case referred to as the Boys on the Tracks, which took place in August of 1987 and involved a high-profile politician. He even went as far as to meet with the mother of one of the victims and a private investigator working the case. ProWrestling.net does say Haynes is not listed as having worked for the WWF live events for the night in question. He also worked a couple nights later at a taping in San Francisco, which would be an airtight alibi for where he wasn't. On August 27, 1987, the bodies of 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives were hit by a cargo train in Alexander, Arkansas, as they lay on the tracks. Dan Harmon, a prosecutor of the case who was later arrested for dealing drugs, is one person implicated in the murder. In January of 2018, Billy Jack Haynes came forward on the Doc Washburn show, claiming to have been involved in the drug business and a witness to the murders, and even videotaped them. According to the head investigator who was working the case, Billy Jack Haynes took a lie detector test and it came back inconclusive because at the time, Billy had some health issues affecting the test. But it was taken into account Billy would essentially be risking his freedom and possibly his life by coming forward, and knew some of the people directly involved. 3 law enforcement officers, 2 attorneys/politicians, and a bouncer for a local nightclub. He also named the governor as having directed the events of the night. Not only does the investigator believe his story, he believes he was there during the night the boys were murdered. In 2018, he had a meeting with Gene Duffy, who was head of the task force for the law enforcement community in Arkansas. According to the detective's homepage, he stated in his comments, "Billy Jack Haynes got up to walk out of his first and last meeting with Gene Duffy after she insulted him when he tried to answer Duffy's question. What happened on the tracks when the boys were murdered?" Billy Jack started telling Duffy his life story. To put context into his life leading to Kevin and Don's murders, when Billy Jack began his story, he mentioned his blind dad. Gene Duffy rudely said, "I don't care about your blind dad. I want to know about the boys' murders." The statement really upset Billy. His father was his hero. Without answering any further questions, Billy walked out before the interview was over. The case still remains unsolved. That was the story of Billy Jack Haynes.